All right, we're ready to move on and begin to add content. With our text formatting, we can break this group up into two categories. Our text formatting elements that are block level. We can still think of these as structural even though they are formatting the text. The other group is inline elements. So these are the elements that we can begin to add into our text content where we want to format them, but we want them to remain in line next to each other instead of breaking a line and stacking on top of each other. So starting with our block level, we can see over here, paragraph is our first. The paragraph is the most common text formatting element, and it should be placed around all paragraph content. Some people choose to do this in a couple of different ways. Some people like to have all of their paragraphs and then wrapped just in one paragraph tag. But a better way of coding is to have a paragraph tag around each individual paragraph because that makes more sense. They are paragraphs, so they should be wrapped each in a paragraph tag. Keeping in mind, again, these are block level elements, so as soon as you add that paragraph tag around text content, it's going to break the line and add a little bit of space. Next we have our headings. So we have the option to add a heading between heading 1 and heading 6. Heading 1 you want to reserve for the title or branding of your website. Heading 2 would then be a subheading, and then heading 3 would be a subheading of a subheading 2, if that makes sense. So you want to think about these headings in value rather than order. So let's say, for example, if we're coding a resume, we have sections of skills, employment, references. The headings for each of those sections are equal in value, so they should all have the same heading tag wrapped around them. They aren't based on order, so it's not that our education is first, so it has a heading 2, or skills is next, so it has a heading 3. That's not the way it's done. Think of it visually, breaking up your content. Those sections are equal, they should have equal value, they should have the same heading applied to them. So by browser default, the styling that is added to headings differs between each one. So heading 1 is going to be larger and bolder, and it's going to work its way down. Eventually, once you get around, I think H4, it's no longer bold. It gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So let's go ahead and add some of those. So I'm going to bounce over to brackets again. I'm going to go here inside that first section and inside my first article. So maybe I know here inside this article, I'm going to start out with a heading 2. So I open H2, and after my heading, I'm going to have 4 paragraphs. So I already know I want to type this 4 times. I'm going to give myself enough room and then add my cursors using Command on the keyboard. So I hold Command and I place more cursors. I then can add all of these paragraphs at the same time. I'm going to go ahead and Command S to save. It's a good idea to make that a habit. Command S every once in a while. You never know, your computer could crash or break down or whatever, and you're saving your work. It doesn't do it automatically. Okay, so that's how I could code it, and then I would be ready to add some content. So at this point, I want to jump over to my other example, here, this index.html. For our next project, we're going to create a very basic resume using only HTML. So this is a good example of one. let's take a moment to just talk through the code so far. We've learned it, but now you can see it. All right, so we have our doc type declaration at the top. We have our HTML element that opens. Notice it does not close until I scroll all the way down here to the bottom, and you can see it here. HTML houses everything outside of the doc type declaration. Inside the HTML, your code is broken up into the head, which houses all of the metadata, and the body, which houses everything else, everything that you want to see on your viewport. So notice the head is a sibling and equal to the body, but there's not a lot of code in it. That's how it should be. In the head right now, we only have the title, but we have the title. Make sure you add that in, and make sure that you change it to make sense with what you're doing. Then inside the body, we break that up into our three structural or main structural elements. We have our header. You can see here where it begins and ends. We'll talk about HR a little bit later. Then we have our main. Notice most everything is in the main. Then at the very bottom, we have our footer. So in case of the resume, we've gone in and inside the header, remember the header should announce what the website is about. And in this case, it's just one page. But this is about John Doe. So John Doe is in a heading 1. There are some other tags here we'll talk about in just a minute. But our heading 1 inside the header, and it's almost going to always be the case. And again, it announces what this web page is about. And most of the time, what the entire website is about. Also included in here, since we're covering a resume, is our contact information for John Doe. After the header, we get into the main, where the bulk of our resume is going to be housed. So here we have, I can see a heading 2 of experience. Experience is a section of a resume. So I have coded it inside a section element. So the section element opens here and closes down here. So this section of experience is broken up into articles for each experience. So for example, the first article, and this person has chosen to then announce this article with an H4, a heading 4. Notice our section was announced with a heading 2. So our heading 4 announces the job. And it goes on and lists, we'll talk about lists and all that stuff, but it goes on, and inside that article talks about just that job. That article then closes before the next article opens, which continues to the next job, the next experience, and so forth. Then that section, the experience section, closes. The next section opens. We have an announcement of what that section is about. We have a heading 2 equal to this first section. We have a heading 2 of experience. Now we have a heading 2 of other relevant experience. Inside there we have 1 article and 2 articles before that section closes. So hopefully you're getting the idea of this now. Also, section of references. Then we have a section of education. Then we have a section of skills. I'm not sure about this order of these sections, but the coding, that's where we want to be at this point. Then we can start to get into our text formatting tags. And I'm not seeing them use a lot of paragraphs. So let's jump back over and we'll start to talk about our lists and the rest of these text formatting tags that we can add. Okay, so lists are kind of their own little beast. anytime you have a list, you first want to open a list element, and then each item in your list is going to be wrapped inside of a list item. So you don't just want to do list items, and you don't just want to do a list. You open the list first, that is the parent of the list items. You nest the list items inside of that list. There are different kinds of lists. We have an unordered list, so the tag is UL. Then we have ordered lists. The tag is OL. There is another kind of list that we're not going to talk about because we're not going to use it in our project. So if you want to look into that, feel free. For now though, both an unordered list and an ordered list, you then inside add in your list items. An unordered list is going to have bullets for the markers, so what sits next to each list item. An ordered list is going to have a number that sits next to each item. Once we learn CSS, we can actually go in and really stylize that list and change those bullets. But for now, you're just working with either ordered list or unordered list. And then once again, don't forget your list items nested inside. So you choose whether you want it to be unordered or ordered, then give your list items. So here's an example. We have an unordered list, and inside we have Photoshop, InDesign, and Illustrator. So let's go ahead and code out each of those, a list, a paragraph, and a few headings inside the code we've been working on. So I'm going to go back to my demo HTML. I forgot, I already did add a heading 2 and our paragraphs. Let's go ahead and back up to the header. I'm going to add in my heading 1. Again, this is to announce the page. So this is John Doe. Don't get this confused with the title. So it's going to feel repetitive, but remember, the title is just seen in the tab. Once you're inside the body, in the header, inside this heading 1, this John Doe now announces this web page and sometimes the entire website. Most of the time, the entire website. So if I take a look, I'm going to go ahead and Command S. Usually the text formatting does need to be saved before you can see it in the live preview. And I still have my live preview open over here, so I'm just going to refresh the page and I can now see John Doe. If you didn't have it open, you would just double click on the lightning bolt again in that top right of the bracket screen. Okay, so now we actually have text content. I can now visually see content in the viewport of my website. Notice there's no space around it. And if I go back in here into my code and I add a bunch of space, save it, refresh my page, it doesn't do anything. So remember, the code is not going to acknowledge those spaces inside your content. You've got to add that space beyond one. You have to add it in different ways. So we'll talk more about that later, but I just wanted to point that out again. You can't control it that way. You have to control it with code. All right, now down to our heading 2. So this section, I'm actually going to move this heading 2 outside of the article. And I'm going to put that in this section. And in this H2, maybe this is my summary for my resume. I go ahead and save that and refresh. I now have summary. Notice there is space between John Doe and summary. It's getting that space because we are adding block level elements, and those block level elements are taking on styling from the browser defaults. So it is adding space, but it's doing it through the code because we're using those block level elements. All right, and then let's add some another heading inside the article. So here in the article, I'm going to go ahead and open an H3. And, oh, you know, this is a summary, so we wouldn't actually do that. I'll save that for the next one. So if this was our summary, I'd really only need one paragraph. So I'm going to delete out those other paragraphs. And just for demo purposes, I'm going to go ahead and grab, oh, you know, she didn't have one. So I'm going to go over to a browser and I'm going to grab some lorem ipsum. If you've taken any design classes at all, you probably already know what lorem ipsum is. If not, no problem. Lorem ipsum is filler text that designers use to be able to add content when they don't know what the content is yet. So I'm going to go to a browser and just search for lorem ipsum. There's a lot of different generators that are out there where you can take lorem ipsum from. And since I only need a paragraph, I'm actually not even going to go into the generator. I'm just going to go ahead and grab this paragraph of text here. I'm going to copy that and bounce back over to brackets. And with my cursor inside that paragraph, I'm going to go ahead and paste that in. So I saved it and I go back over to, go back over to my live preview and refresh, and I can see my paragraph. So I wanted to add those in so you can again see how these block level elements are acting. Now that we have a paragraph, you can see even though John Doe and summary, we don't have content that extends all the way across the viewport, the containing elements do. So the header goes across the entire viewport right now. Main goes across the entire viewport. Section, article, H2, paragraph, they all extend all the way across. And with our paragraph, we can now see that. It goes all the way to the end of the viewport and doesn't break and drop the line until it hits the end and is forced to do so. Once we get into styling a little bit later, we change the width of our elements, then we can control where that's breaking. But for now, that's how it is. So you got to take that into consideration when you're designing your resume. All right, so let's take a look now at what is next on our list. Oh, lists. We haven't done those yet, so let's go back and do those. So I'm going to come down here to this last section. Let's say my references are going to be here in this last section. I'm going to go ahead and give myself some space and add a heading or an intro to this section. I'm going to keep the same one I've been using, which is an H2. It has the same value as the ones I used before. So I open my H2. So now I will add skills. That's a good place to add a list. So here first, I'm going to go into my section, give myself some room, add in a list. I'm going to choose, do I want numbers or bullets? I'm going to go with bullets. I think they look cleaner. So I'm going to open angle bracket, and that is an unordered list. So I go ahead and add my UL. I added an extra bracket. Notice how my text turned red. Got to fix that as soon as I notice. And it did not close it because I had to fix it. It didn't close it for me. So I've got to remember to do that later. But first I'm going to go ahead and add in my list items. So I open list item. And I already know I'm going to have a full list. Let's say I have 5 skills. Hopefully you have more than that. But remember, we can speed up our coding. I'm going to go ahead and add in some room here. Use command to add more cursors. And add in some more list items. Don't forget to then place your cursor so it's not still all of the above. And I can go in and close my UL. And as soon as I typed angle bracket / it knew what I needed to close and it did it for me. Then I can go back into each list item. Let's say my skills are Photoshop. Next list item, InDesign. Next one, Illustrator. That's not spelled. After that, maybe Dreamweaver. brackets. You should be a lot more thorough and be doing this when you do your project. But for time's sake, I'm just brushing through it. And what other Adobe products are out there? Let's say Acrobat. Alright, so I went ahead and saved it. I'm going to go over to my preview and refresh, and I now see my list. What I don't see is an introduction to the list. So don't forget, my section needs an introduction, needs an H2 of skills. Go ahead and save that and refresh. Much better. I'm starting to build my resume. I can see my summary section, I can see my skills section, and just by browser default styling, I can see the structure visually of the importance or the hierarchy of that content.